Hi, everyone. Happy Friday. Welcome to the Ohio Chapter American Academy of Pediatrics Parenting at Mealtime and Playtime Mindful Eating webinar. We are excited for this webinar with you all today, and we're so glad that you're all able to join us. Next slide. These speakers have no disclosures and no off-label products will be discussed. For a lot of you, I know many of you have joined our trainings and use our PMP materials on a regular basis. We have some new PMP materials and resources available on our website, as well as those resources that are translated into Spanish. You can access them here, or you can download our PMP mobile app on Apple Store or Google Play, and we would love for you all to download those today if you are able to. We're excited to share those new resources with you all. Next slide. Here's an example of some of the resources that we have available. We have ages all the way up to 5, and we also extended to the older age groups now. So we have all the way up to 11 currently, which is so exciting that we're able to extend those resources and provide information on other topics. Next slide. Here's an example of some of the other topics that we have: starting solid foods, play, recognizing hunger and fullness cues. Next slide. And our extended age resources. We have them for caregivers, for children on eating the rainbow, cooking with kids, screen time, all those important topics that are important always, but also prevalent during the time of COVID. Next slide. We also have our PMP toolkit online and PDF version, which we have been working really hard as a team to keep updated and have trainings and resources and tons of information, EMR tools, troubleshooting, just different information that you can use with families and with your practices. And we would love for you all to register for the toolkit. The link is there. Next slide. And before I pass it over, I have put the pre-survey link in the chat box. I also send it out via email. So please, I'll send it again. I'll also send the links to the toolkit and the resources and everything like that. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat box. Keep your video and your lines muted, please. And I will go ahead and before I go ahead and pass it off, we also want to thank ODH for their support with the Parenting at Mealtime and Playtime program. We're so thankful for our collaboration with them. Divya and Aaron, I'll pass it over to you all to introduce yourselves and get started.
Thank you, Alex. Good afternoon. I'm Divya Dendiluri, a pediatric nutritionist, dietitian, and lactation consultant at Dayton Children's Hospital. Hi, I'm Erin Chausia. I'm also a pediatric dietitian at Dayton Children's Hospital. We are so excited to discuss this topic with you today, and we thank you for listening and participating today. So first, we're going to explore what mindful eating is and how to implement it. We're going to identify hunger cues and satiety cues, identify the difference between mindful eating and intuitive eating, practice mindful eating strategies by using the senses to explore food. We're going to brainstorm and discuss barriers and solutions to mindful eating at meals. And we're going to talk about implementing ideas that help to create a positive meal environment for our kiddos. So without further ado, we'll get started. So what is mindful eating? Mindful eating is deliberately paying attention non-judgmentally to all aspects of food and eating on a moment-by-moment basis. So we really want to think about when we do eat. Do we normally watch TV? Are we normally working while we eat lunch? Are you listening to a webinar like you are right now, maybe during lunchtime? Are we scrolling through our phone? What kind of things are we doing while we're eating? A lot of times it's distracted eating because we are multitasking. We are doing something while we are eating. So mindful eating helps us have this conscious awareness of what our senses are telling the body and how our body is reacting to the food that we are eating.
So it's important that we ensure that we're not judging our thoughts while we're eating when we practice mindful eating. We want to validate what the senses are telling us and how our body is feeling, instead of focusing on maybe things that we've learned externally for what we should be feeling. For example, as healthcare providers, we know like a lot of fast food, not the healthiest kind of foods for us. So when we maybe, we're on the go and we just need a quick bite to eat, we grab maybe a cheeseburger from some kind of fast food place. And our bodies or our minds are telling us, cheeseburgers at fast food places are not good for us. They're not healthy. They're going to make us feel greasy and just not feel good after eating it. And that's a judgment that we're putting in from external cues and from what we've all learned as healthcare professionals. So instead, mindful eating is actually trying to block out that kind of external cues and really listening to what our body is telling us as we eat the cheeseburger. So how is it really tasting? How does it smell? How does it really feel when it sits in our stomach? And so those kinds of practices help us to mindfully eat and help us to gather more data and information when we do eat. And we want to not be judging kind of what thoughts come up. So what if you're actually really enjoying that cheeseburger and it tastes really good and you actually feel pretty good after eating it? That would be non-judgmentally, making sure that you're actually really feeling what you're feeling instead of using external cues to tell you that. So mindful eating can help us transform a relationship with food and enhance our awareness of food, hunger, satisfaction, and our habits and behaviors. It really helps us listen to our bodies and eat without feeling guilty. It allows us to have more satisfaction with the food because we become hyper aware of the taste, the smell, how it's satisfying our taste buds, our mental hunger, and how it's satisfying our actual physiological hunger, how it's satisfying our hungry stomachs. It helps us to improve our awareness of our hunger and fullness cues and really have a more intense enjoyment with the eating experience. And then therefore, because we're really paying attention to our bodies, we're not going to have any problems with overeating or undereating because it allows us to really pay attention to what our stomachs are telling us. And doing the non-judgmental aspect of mindful eating helps us reduce guilt and shame.
So we typically see the My Plate with fruits, vegetables, protein, grains, and dairy. And this depiction of the My Plate focuses on the different aspects that are key to mindful eating. We want to observe how our bodies feel as we bring it to the table, observe how the food looks and smells. We want to be able to have no distractions if possible, so we can focus on our food and how we feel eating that food. We also want to savor our food, and savoring includes noting to ourselves as we eat how a food smells and tastes, including focusing on the textures and flavors of that food. We want to be non-judgmental, eliminating food rules and good versus bad mentality as we taste and experience the food, as our bodies respond from both our stomachs filling and our minds interpreting that fullness or satiety. Being in the moment is the awareness that allows us to truly taste the food and notice the nuances of flavor instead of eating without thinking and continuing to eat when that sense of taste has dulled. The research behind mindful eating, I really wanted to delve a little into current research. We know from research that eating disorders stem from a fear of certain foods or certain amounts of foods changing how our body looks. A person suffering from the eating disorder can have a negative body image and may believe eating in general or eating specific foods may make the body less desirable. When addressing food with a mindful eating approach, those with eating disorders may experience the food in a new way where they understand how the food actually feels in their body instead of focusing on how the food changes the body's shape or size. Several studies have shown that mindful eating strategies may help treat eating disorders and possibly help with weight loss. Psychologist Jean Criseller and colleagues have conducted an NIH-funded study using mindful eating techniques for the treatment of binge eating. So the study that they did, one of the studies was a randomized controlled study that included 150 binge eaters and compared a mindfulness-based therapy to a standard psychoeducational treatment and a control group. A decline in binge eating and depression was observed in both the treatment groups. Mindfulness-based therapy seemed to have helped people enjoy their food more and have less of a sense of struggle about controlling what they're eating. Those who meditated both at meal times and throughout the day got more out of the program. Mindfulness can help people recognize the difference between emotional and physical hunger and satiety, and introduces a moment of choice between the urge and eating.
So we have two other studies that we wanted to highlight with mindful eating research. So the first one was comparing mindful eating to a self-management group of those who had type 2 diabetes. So there was a self-management intervention that was based off of the Smart Choices program. And then there was also a intervention group based on mindful eating. It was a 3-month trial intervention. It was a randomized control trial. And we saw that about most of the participants had a body mass index that was greater than 27 in that group. And most of them had a hemoglobin A1C greater than 7 as well. And all of these adults had to be not requiring insulin therapy for greater than 1 year prior to the study. So there was no significant difference in weight change, but both groups saw that there could be a successful treatment option with the mindful eating group and the self-management group. There were significant improvements in depressive symptoms, outcome expectations, nutrition, and eating-related self-efficacy and cognitive control for both groups at the 3-month follow-up. It also showed that both types of intervention are effective and that it gives people more choices for how they would like to choose to do active lifestyle changes for their type 2 diabetes management. The mindful eating group had a significant increase in mindfulness, but the Smart Choices group had a significant increase in the fruit and vegetable consumption. Now, the limitations with the study is that it's only a 3-month period. And as we know, a lot of behavior changes kind of fade off a little bit after a 3-month period. So it would be great to have a little bit more time with this to see what those end results would be if it was longer than a 3-month period. So that brings me to the SHINE study. So the SHINE study compared a similar group, those with type 2 diabetes. It had 194 people in the group. The median BMI was 35.5 and the median age was 47 years. It was about 78% women, which is a pretty significant amount of women in this study. It found that after a 5.5-month intervention of either just diet and exercise or diet and exercise with mindfulness, that those after 12 months that did the mindful eating arm had a statistically significant decrease in fasting blood sugar and a statistically significant increase in the knowledge of mindful eating. It also did find that those who did the mindful eating arm had a decreased calorie consumption from sweets. That was not statistically significant though. So it's something interesting that comes from it, but it doesn't show us for sure data. So these are just both some good studies that show that it can be a helpful aspect in treating those who have type 2 diabetes, especially for those who maybe want a different kind of approach than the traditional care management approaches. Okay, so we're going to switch gears now and talk a little bit about how we get started with mindful eating. So first, we have to begin with a shopping list. So everything starts from the food we get at the grocery store. We want to consider the health value of every item that we're adding to our list and trying to stick to that list when you're buying instead of being kind of pulled by the marketing of different food items. We want to fill most of our cart with items from the produce section and from the outside of the grocery store, which I'm sure a lot of you have already heard of, and avoid the center aisles that have a lot more processed foods and anything at the checkout counter that may grab the attention as well. We want to really shop mindfully, and that means we really focus on what kinds of foods we want to buy and what kind of value we want from those foods. Then we want to assemble our meal or snack. So we want to come to the table with an appetite, but not ravenously hungry. If you skip meals, you become ravenously hungry, and then it's harder to really make a mindful choice when we're choosing what we're eating and when we're eating. We want to start with a small portion that will help us to really be able to think about how much we're eating, and we can always give ourselves more if we're still hungry. And they typically recommend using an about 9-inch plate. We really want to appreciate our food. So pausing for a moment before you come to the table and before you start eating, thinking about how did this food get to you, and trying to appreciate all of those factors of how this food got to you, and being thankful for the fact that you have the food. And then this will help kind of calm you down and transition you into a meal eating experience. So that the next thing you want to use are all of your senses. So we need to think about, how does it smell? How does it look? What kind of textures does it have when we eat it? What kind of sounds does it make when we eat it? What are the taste aspects? We want to really try and take small bites and to chew the bites thoroughly, because as we eat and chew more and more, there's different levels of flavor that will come through. And eating slowly really allows all of these things to happen. And we can only do that if we're not ravenously hungry. So these are some kind of intros into how we want to start with the mindful eating experience.
As Erin had mentioned, mindful eating starts with mindful shopping. So having a shopping list ready is very useful. To shop with intention, planning the trip in advance is very important. So planning the trip, and then when you are at the grocery store, taking a few deep breaths before entering the store also helps center our attention to the present. Even as you go through the grocery store, through the different aisles, confronting different sights, smells, sounds inside, breathing can really help bring us back into the present, into the moment. And then as we shop, it's important to experience the store with our senses, the sights, the smells, the sounds, and just really absorbing all of that. And then as we select our groceries, being mindful of where that food came from, where the produce came from, the fruits and the vegetables from the farms, maybe a different country, a different city, and also thinking about the packaged foods, where they came from. We may not know the answers, but thinking along those lines can really help with bringing us to the present. And then last but not least, being grateful for that food that we are able to purchase for the family is very important as well. The next step is cooking or assembling our meal or snack. So it's an important step to eating mindfully and bringing that conscious awareness to what we're going to eat today or what we're going to feed our family today. So some of the things that we can do are try a new recipe. And then if we do have some random ingredients in our house, maybe choosing a protein food, a whole grain, and a fruit or vegetable, and try to maybe experiment and come up with something new, a new recipe of our own. That could be a family special recipe even. And then involving family and friends in the cooking process can obviously help with bonding, but also help with everybody being involved and bringing mindful attention to the foods that we prepare. And then cleaning and chopping vegetables and fruits, refrigerating them for use at a later time can be really helpful. And then also preparing proteins. So thinking of maybe preparing the beans and lentils by soaking and cooking them beforehand, and then having them refrigerated for use later, and then baking, grilling, roasting, or slow cooking meats for use for a later time. Also keeping nuts, nut butters, and seeds in the pantry. All of this can really help with making sure that we have all the foods we need in order to cook and have that process of mindful cooking going.
So next, we're going to talk about how we do the mindful eating techniques as we go to eat the meal. So we want to find a place to focus on our meal and remove all distractions as much as possible. So we wanted to then take a few breaths before eating. This will help calm us down, help us to focus on the meal at hand. Then we want to chew slowly. So one tip a lot of dietitians recommend is putting the fork down in between each bite. So this really helps to remind us to chew slowly, to really experience those senses with that food, and to rest your hand or to, take another relaxing bite between each food. This helps us thoughtfully really slow down the eating experience. We want to really engage all of our senses. So we want to think about the food shape and color, feel the texture with full concentration, smell the food's aroma, taste the food and discover how the taste changes, lingers in your mouth, and to hear the sound as we chew. A lot of times we think of the only thing that actually makes us enjoy a food is its flavor. But really when you have a food item that you're missing that texture, that crunch, maybe you're missing it's too crunchy, we're missing the kind of mushy kind of part of the meal. All of those things really do impact your satisfaction with the meal. So really focusing on each and every sense and how much that contributes to the meal experience. And then we want to really reflect on the meal and reflect on our style of eating. And we don't want to be judgmental. So if we had difficulty paying attention to our bites or had difficulty slowing down, we just take note and we learn from that experience. So we want to reflect on the style of eating with curiosity and without judgment. So some things to ask would be, do you normally eat fast or slow? Do you honor or recognize your satisfaction cues? Do you even know what those are? Are you choosing foods based on nourishment or desire or both? What do you tell yourself about the food? Do you talk about it being good or bad? Are you talking about it being interesting or boring, fun or a punishment? So fun foods, we think of like celebration foods, punishment foods, we think of like salads or vegetables. Is it nourishing and is it filling? So all of those things help us to reflect on the meal and what we're choosing to eat for the meal. And we want to use this mindfulness to create a relationship, a positive relationship with what we're eating. So what kind of things are we desiring? What kinds of things are we choosing? And how do we meld those two things together? Something else that helps us do this is journaling. So journaling can really help you think through all these things after you eat. And that'll help give us some guidance on what kinds of things we need to focus on for the next meal. And if journaling is just not your thing, then sometimes telling someone about your meal experience and telling them all the things you learned, or even maybe pretending you're going to tell someone and just so rehearsing that in your mind, those kinds of things are good reflection techniques. And then we want to notice how we really feel before eating and then afterwards. So how full are we? Are we actually getting the satisfaction that we want from the meal? And then something else to reflect on outside of the actual meal and the food itself is the awareness of our body. So when we are eating, where are we eating? Are we standing? Are we sitting? Are we at the counter? Are we at the table? Are we on the couch? Do we use our utensils or are we using our fingers? How are we moving that food to and from our mouth? And how does this relate to our hunger and fullness cues? So those are some really important things to think about as we're actually eating the meal. And evidence suggests that mindfulness really increases with practice. So it may seem a lot to think about that with every single meal, having to really pay attention. And so starting maybe with one meal per week, then one meal per day, and then slowly getting there with almost every meal. Eventually it'll become a second kind of nature to you. And even if you are distracted, you'll be able to still key into some of those mindful eating techniques.
Absolutely.
Oh, no, you're fine. So this is another pictorial kind of graphic that shows a lot of the things that we already talked about. So we want to make sure we are preparing our meals and preparing them with thought, breathing and relaxing. So taking those deep breaths, noticing where we're actually eating, and maybe changing where we're eating because we're actually mindfully thinking about eating. So maybe instead of eating at the counter with your breakfast because you're, packing lunches or you're rushed, we really take that time to sit down at the table and eat. Noticing what is on your plate and how much space each of the food items take up, paying attention to the smells and the colors, all the things that we mentioned previously. Chewing thoroughly, so 20 times at least per each bite, slowing that eating down by putting that fork down, maybe drinking like a sip of water between each bite. And then stopping when we're full. So that's a big thing, is that we want to actually stop when we're full instead of when the plate tells us that we're full or when the plate tells us that we're done. And then make it like a separate activity. So like we talked about, we want to remove the distractions of the TV, of packing lunches, of looking at our phone, working. Those are important for eating. So another kind of graphic that also shows some of the similar things is making every bite a meditation. So when we really want to think about eating, we want to use these steps. So we're pondering it. We're checking in with ourselves about our hunger before we eat. How hungry are we? A lot of times you've heard maybe that we would want to tell patients to, if you're hungry, wait 20 minutes. Let's make sure you're actually really hungry before you eat. But really, research shows that it's better to notify yourself, okay, I'm hungry, and then therefore, let's eat. So we don't want to delay eating when we feel that hunger, because it makes us become ravenous. And then that makes us really hard to actually pay attention to what we're eating. And you can really overeat at the meal if you're ravenously hungry, because you can't stop yourself from eating since you're trying to satisfy that hunger. We want to ensure slow eating, as it allows the mind to interpret our sense of smell, texture, taste, and our diminishing hunger. And you can't respond to the body unless you're actually taking the time to listen to it. And then something I think that's really important is not pushing the clean plate club. So that's maybe something that you grew up with, or you've heard of parents telling their kids. They want their kids to eat the protein, the vegetables. They want their kids to eat all of the food that they serve. And so then they initiate this clean plate club. Well, over time, that's telling the child to ignore their internal hunger and fullness cues, and therefore it'll end up dulling those cues. And eventually the body won't have those cues because they're completely ignored every time. So then as an adult, the child needs to relearn those hunger and satiety cues. So we really want to have each person really listening to their hunger and satiety cues instead of using external forces like if the plate's done and if there's nothing left on the plate. And that really helps us to strengthen the connection between the mind and the body and give our bodies the nutrients and calories that they really need instead of what external factors are telling. Our bodies are a lot smarter than we give them credit for.
Yeah. Okay. So we talked a little bit about how checking in with our bodies and listening to our hunger and satiety cues is a big part of mindful eating. So hunger can be experienced in a variety of ways. It's a subjective feeling, and it can really differ from person to person. And contrary to the popular belief, hunger is not just felt in the stomach. For some people, that growling in the stomach can be one of the last signs of hunger, which they feel. And then that comes only at a point when they're ravenously hungry. And then for others, it could be a headache or feeling dizzy. So just even, kind of listening and paying attention can be really important. So we have, I just wanted to touch on some of those signs of hunger that you can feel that may not be felt just in the stomach. So energy-wise, hunger can be, if you're tired or having lesser energy than normal or feeling more sluggish, that can be one way of noticing that we're hungry. Sometimes trouble concentrating, having a headache, feeling dizzy, unable to focus, feeling lightheaded can also be signs of hunger. And then moods wise, being hangry, that classic, like feeling cranky before meals, being on edge, irritability, being disinterested can also be some signs of hunger. And then the physical signs in the stomach can be that growling or rumbling sensation, that feeling empty in the stomach or a gnawing feeling, some pain. All of those can also be some signs of hunger. And so really noticing and sometimes even journaling that can be helpful for us to even look back and see so that we train ourselves to understand what are some subtle signs and some late signs of hunger that we feel. So this is a hunger scale. I think this is a great way to kind of check in with our bodies to see where we are. We can use it to help us get in tune with our hunger and satiety cues. And the hunger portion of this tool is, from the numbers 1 to 5. A 5 being neutral, where you're not necessarily hungry, but you're also not full. And working our way down through the scale, a 4 indicates early feelings of hunger where you can eat and are even ready to eat, but you're not feeling that urgency to eat. And then 3 would mean where you're hungry, you're very hungry and you're looking forward to eating, and there is that sense of urgency to eat. And then a step below would be 2, where you may begin to feel a little irritable, maybe have some headache, some of those signs of hunger that we discussed a little earlier. And then 1 would be the lowest end of the scale, which is that painful primal feeling of hunger. At this level, one may start feeling really dizzy, shaky, nauseated because you're so hungry or ravenous. For most people, eating experiences feel the best when they occur between 3 and 4 on the scale. And then it's also best to stay on, between 3 and 7 on the hunger fullness scale for having the best eating experiences.
So we talked about the hunger part and our hunger cues. Now we're going to talk about satiety. So many times when we're eating or we crave something, we feel that the sensation or the taste of it fades as we eat it. So if you think back to maybe a very nice sunny day in the summertime and you're like, oh, an ice cream just sounds really good right now. So you go and you get an ice cream because, it's a sunny day, it's a nice day, you want to enjoy that. So you get your ice cream and you take a bite and it's just amazing. It's just satisfying that craving that you had for that ice cream. And then you eat a couple more bites and it still tastes really good. And it's really getting that good craving to be satisfied. You're feeling joyful because you have that ice cream. And then you can continue to eat and it tastes good, but it doesn't really have that same amazing taste at the beginning. But then you continue to eat because you're looking for that amazing taste to come back. And then you're done. So then you may even want to eat more ice cream because you still want that amazing taste sensation that you started with to come back. But when you're mindfully eating, you actually acknowledge that fading and dullness of that taste is actually telling you that you're satisfied, that you're good. You don't really need any more ice cream. You can stop eating because your craving is kind of clenched. So we can only really have this though if we let ourselves have ice cream when we want it. So when we have any kind of restriction, mental restriction or physical restriction when it comes to a food, we're not going to ever have that satisfaction with that food and be okay with that taste fading if we're not allowing ourselves to have it enough. So that's really key in being able to respond to that sign of satiety. Another reason sign that you may be satisfied is you become easily distracted. So that's not just like when a kid starts throwing food on the floor or not those kinds of distractions, but you're eating and you're paying attention to everything and then your mind really wanders. And so maybe that's telling you that you're done, that you're satisfied, that maybe you need to move on to a different food, or maybe you need to stop eating the meal completely. We also want to stop eating when we actually feel filled. So that's the traditional sign of satiety, the actual filled feeling, no longer being hungry, but we don't want to be uncomfortably full. So we want to realize that we're feeling filled before we actually become uncomfortable and become stuffed. It's really easy to kind of override that, especially when we're wanting that great taste sensation. So that's why it's really important to allow yourself to have those mindful eating techniques and help regulate the energy that you're actually taking in. So some ways to actually stop eating when we feel satisfied. Sometimes it's not so easy to listen to those satiety cues. So the first thing is slowing down. It really takes our stomachs a while to communicate to the brain that it's full. And so when we eat really fast, it's hard to get to that point where we're really listening to the body and we don't become completely stuffed. So slowing down between those bites and pausing to really reflect on our body. We want both our mental satisfaction and stomach satisfaction. So we want to be satisfied as in a sense that we no longer have hunger, but we also want to make sure that our mind is satisfied so that we feel like we've gotten enough of the food that we're eating. So sometimes it's okay to eat a couple bites past our filled feeling in our stomach if our mind is not satisfied yet, if we still really want to eat that last bite of like the spinach artichoke dip or that ice cream, but because we want both our stomachs and our brains to be satisfied. When our brains aren't satisfied after eating a meal, we tend to like maybe 20, 30 an hour later, start going through the pantry looking for something good, just that would, put the edge off. And that means our brain wasn't satisfied when we ate. Some other things we want to do is remind ourselves that we can have the food anytime in the near future, whether that be even a couple hours later, in the next couple of days or the next week. So again, that's that keying into making sure we don't have that mental restriction on a food item, because otherwise it'll make us want that food item even more. Sometimes this is hard because if we're at a restaurant, then we can't always go to this restaurant and eat this food. So trying to find a recipe that's similar to that food item that you can make at home, packing up those leftovers, even if it's like a super small amount, so that you really get to know that you can have those things again, and you give yourself permission to do so. So we want to make sure that we're eating when we really want to eat a food, and this will help us feel satisfied when we're actually done. We also want to intentionally add those different food items that we're like just always seeming to crave intentionally to different meals and snacks, because then that'll help us not have that mental focus on them all the time. When we make foods off limits, or we make foods seem kind of like this ultimate great thing and we can only have it once in a while, then we end up becoming almost consumed by them. So if we have them a little bit more intentionally, it'll help the body be like, oh, I can have this whenever, and therefore we can stop focusing so much on it and really feel satisfied when we do eat it. And then honoring our hunger cues and giving ourselves unconditional permission to eat. That'll help our bodies stop eating when they're satisfied, because we know that we can eat later if we want to. Instead of ignoring those hunger cues, then the body's trying to maximize the time that we're actually eating. It's similar to a feast and a famine kind of sense. So our bodies don't really know the difference between feast or famine. So if we don't let ourselves eat and then we do eat, the body thinks that it's going to have another period where it's not going to be able to eat at all. So it wants to maximize how much it gets in at that eating experience. So to prevent that, we want to like reassure our body, you'll get food again in maybe a couple of hours, and give ourselves that permission. And then we won't have that feast or famine kind of mentality in the stomach, and we won't be overeating at those meal opportunities. So there are also sometimes reasons to eat other than hunger. So we've talked about like why and what kind of hunger cues are, but even if you're not feeling hungry, that doesn't mean that you can't eat, right? So sometimes we go longer periods without eating, and eating before that time, even if we're not hungry, is more desirable than eating afterwards. So let's say you have a lunch meeting and there's not going to be lunch provided, but you have to go to this meeting. If you're not hungry before the meeting, it's probably still a good idea to eat something so that when the meeting's over, you're not ravenous. And remember, when you're ravenous, you're not able to have that mindful eating experience. We also may be eating because we're relearning our hunger and satiety cues. So the only way to relearn our hunger and satiety cues is to give ourselves regular nutrition. And that would be eating every 3 to 4 hours. And so we're reminding the body, this is a normal schedule of how we eat. And eventually the body responds and gives us those hunger and satiety cues at those times. We also want to eat when we are very interested in a food item and it just tastes so good right now. Sometimes, you're at work and something sparks your interest and you maybe ate lunch like an hour or two ago, but something just really sounds good. Go ahead and eat it. That really helps reassure our mind and our stomach that, what we're going to give it what it wants. We also want to make sure we eat to enjoy life. So a lot of living life is sometimes sharing in meals, and sometimes that's when we're not hungry. So when you're at a birthday party, a wedding, maybe other celebrations, you should still eat, even if you're not hungry, because it's part of the experience. It's part of living life and living life to the fullest. And then a couple really major things for some patients is when they drink coffee or they take a medication that suppresses the appetite, they're not going to have those hunger cues. So it's important to eat regardless when we don't have those hunger cues, especially when we know that we're drinking coffee or we're taking a medication that suppresses appetite. Otherwise, we find that in like an hour or two, we're so hungry because the body hasn't gotten the nutrition that it needs. And then we get to that ravenous point where we can't be mindful about what we're eating. And therefore, it's important in that sense to eat despite not being hungry. So you may have heard of mindful eating, and you may have also heard of intuitive eating. And sometimes those kind of terms get like confused. So they are very intricately involved with each other, but they are two different things. So mindful eating is a part of intuitive eating, and intuitive eating is a little bit of a bigger kind of movement and practice. They're not interchangeable, but we know that they can be complementary to each other. So intuitive eating is based on a biological hunger of whichever foods are desired by the person without guilt. So an intuitive eater really enjoys the eating experience and feels satisfied both physically and mentally after eating. And so it not only focuses on eating a variety of foods, but also focuses on taking away that good or bad kind of terms of foods and taking away the demonizing and elevating of different foods. It has a component of gentle nutrition where the eater does choose specific foods like protein, fiber, or other nutrients to really boost the nutritional content and satisfy the eater. But it allows the eater to also eat foods that maybe don't have those typical health benefits. And it also focuses on body positivity. So it's important in that process. Intuitive eating helps you to kind of heal your body image issues. And it focuses on exercise, taking it from a like burning calories, toning, or no pain, no gain kind of mentality, more to a joyful movement mentality, and like thinking about what kinds of things that exercise and movement really helps outside of those things. So like it gives us sometimes stress relief. It helps us to feel stronger or feel rejuvenated. So it focuses on a different aspect of why movement is beneficial. And it really is a framework. It has 10 principles. They were developed by Evelyn Triboli and Elise Resch, and it helps important to gain body attunement and remove obstacles to body attunement. It helps the person achieve a healthy relationship with food, mind, and body. So the mindful eating part of it is specifically about eating, whereas intuitive eating has this whole other aspect and realm with it. So mindful eating and intuitive eating are both common practices to help heal the relationship with food. It's important to note that intuitive eating focuses mostly on the emotional and mental aspects of eating, moving the body, and how to honor and treat the body. And this is intended for removing guilt and shame from anything. So if we feel guilty after eating certain foods that we've always learned are not so healthy for us, or we feel guilty because we didn't get exercise in that day, it really tries to remove those guilt and shame aspects for the person following this. And therefore it's really not supposed to be used for a weight loss strategy. It also uses something called HAZE, or a help at every size approach. And so it's very much entwined with that approach. And I think that's an important thing to note, because that allows people to be able to participate and heal the relationship with food without focusing on weight. So there are a lot of barriers to eating mindfully at meals. So the first one I think that all of us have is time. In our society today, there just doesn't seem to be enough time. So you think, oh, wow, I'd have to spend a lot of time thinking about what I'm eating, preparing what I'm eating. And so time is definitely difficult. And that's why I think starting out with like one meal per week, even think about, okay, I'm going to dedicate the time to really eating mindfully at this meal. And as you continue to practice that, you can use it more and more with different meals, and it becomes so much faster and easier for you. And eventually you can really use it at every meal, even with distractions. And it actually can become not so like burdensome and not take up so much time. Some other things are kids. So kids are loud, sometimes they misbehave, it can be distracting. So it's really hard to really pay attention to what your body is telling you and all their senses when you have kids at the table. And so that's when it's a great time to engage the kids in that mindful eating experience. So you take a bite of your green beans, for instance, and you feel that, wow, they are crunchy and they are green and they taste like this and that. And you ask the kids, what do you think? This is what I'm getting from the green bean. What are you getting from the green bean? It helps kids be able to think about the mindful eating exercises as well. So we also might be lonely or bored when we eat, especially if we're eating by ourselves. And so something that you can do is you can practice mindful eating by maybe Skyping with a friend, or thinking about what you would share with someone about your meal and then actually sharing it with them afterwards. That can help really get that loneliness to go away. And the boredom, if you're really focusing on the different senses, then hopefully that boredom kind of also eludes away as well. And then really remembering to actually do it. So that's sometimes the biggest challenge is, like, I intend to do it at least one time a day, but then remembering to actually do that mindful eating. And so maybe setting an alarm on your phone to remind you to do that is a helpful thing. And then when you're too hungry, that's what we talked about, common theme throughout this presentation. When you're too hungry, you cannot mindfully eat. So some other things, especially as we're talking about families and kids, is setting a positive meal environment. So we want to start by setting up the physical environment for success. So that's removing the distractions, making sure there's nothing that's going to distract the kids at the table. We want to clear off the bar, the table, wherever we're sitting, and actually set out plates and silverware and napkins, even if the meal doesn't necessarily need that, like pizza. We want to ensure that kids are sitting on the proper kind of high chair, booster seat chair, just to make sure that they're in a good position to eat. And putting food on the kids' plates before calling them to the table, because otherwise they can get pretty antsy while you're serving, especially if the food needs to cool down before they can actually eat. It's important to get the wiggles out. So have the kids do something that, gets a lot of energy out beforehand. And then it's important to then have that transition activity where then it makes them calm down and focus, like washing their hands, saying a prayer, that kind of thing. Another important thing is having a no thank you bowl, especially for toddlers. So toddlers become overwhelmed because they can't necessarily say, I don't want this, but they don't always want everything that's on their plate. And so when they don't want it on their plate and they don't want to eat it, they tend to put it on the floor. So if we have something called a no thank you bowl and we talk to them about what that is, and they can put the food in the no thank you bowl, and that helps create a more positive meal environment so that we're not, scolding them for putting things on the floor. We want to create conversation about other things than the food. So we want kids to really enjoy the meal environment, and maybe they get to share something that they loved that day or something new they learned. And so that helps them have a positive time with the meal. And then talking about the food, how it looks and feels and tastes, and what kind of things it helps the body, instead of saying, this is a good food, this is a bad food, or eat more of this, don't eat so much of that. And then try not to pressure or coax the child to eat. Usually children will do the opposite if you try and do that. So it's important just to talk about the food in general and not pressuring them to eat.
Thank you, Erin. I think I really connected with just the idea of being kind to our bodies and also also that permission to eat. I think I really connected with that. Thank you. So this actually brings us to the Raisin method. We discussed through this presentation key aspects of mindful eating. And we would like to walk you through a mindful eating exercise today. And we would like to invite you to join in and have maybe a raisin or a piece of fruit, maybe a piece of chocolate or any food of your choice ready for this exercise. So the Raisin Meditation is a mindfulness exercise that requires us to focus our minds on the present moment using our senses. So just focusing on what we can hear, see, smell, taste, and touch. It's a way to cultivate mindfulness, reduce stress, and enjoy everyday pleasures. So let's begin by connecting our breath and body. Take a moment to feel your feet on the ground and notice your experience in this moment. With your awareness in this moment, notice any thoughts, sensations, or emotions you are experiencing. Tune into the awareness or sensation that you have in your body, or of that feeling of hunger, thirst, or maybe that feeling of fullness. If you were going to eat or drink something right now, what is your body hungry for? What is it thirsty for? Pay attention and notice with awareness the sensations that give you this information. Take the piece of food or the raisin and hold it in your palm. Or maybe hold it between your index finger and thumb. Now bring your attention to the item in your hand and imagine that you are seeing it for the first time. Observe with curiosity as you pay attention and notice the color, the shape, texture, and size. Is there anything else you notice or feel? Maybe noticing the highlights, where the sun shines, the dark hollows, the folds, maybe any asymmetries in the piece of food that's on your hand. Imagine what it took for this item to get to your hands. The sunshine, the water, the time, processing, and shipping. You may choose to be aware of the gratitude for everyone involved in the cultivation and preparation of this food. You may also choose to bring your own gratitude or spiritual blessing. Again, notice if you have any thoughts or sensations at this time. Continue to breathe and to be fully present in this moment. Hold the food beneath your nose. With each inhalation, take in any smell, aroma, or fragrance that may arise. As you do this, notice anything interesting that may be happening in your mouth or stomach. Now slowly bring the food to your lips, noticing how your hand and arm know where exactly to position. With full awareness of your hand moving towards your mouth, place the food on your tongue. Place it in your mouth without chewing or swallowing it. Just allow it to be in your mouth, roll it around to the different parts of your mouth and tongue. Notice the flavor and texture. Notice any physical sensations within your body, especially your mouth and stomach. Continue to breathe as you explore the sensation of having the food in your mouth. When you are ready, prepare to chew the food, noticing how and where it needs to be for chewing. Then very consciously take 1 or 2 bites into it and notice what happens. Experience any waves of taste that emanate from this chewing process. Without swallowing yet, notice the bare sensations of taste and texture in your mouth and how it has changed with the chewing. When you feel ready to swallow the food, see if you can first detect the intention to swallow so that this is experienced consciously before you actually swallow the food. When you're ready, swallow the food and notice the path it takes from your mouth into your throat and into your stomach. Notice the sensation and taste that may linger in your mouth. Connect again to your body and breath and notice your experience in this moment. Sense how your body feels as a whole after you have completed this exercise. Next, I invite you to pick up another bite of food and choose to eat it however you wish. Notice if there was anything different with this experience, with this choice that you made, and notice how similar or different this experience is compared to what was with eating with when I was walking you through that. Well, this brings us to the end of our talk. We have listed some journal articles, books, and other resources on mindful eating that you may find useful. And thank you so much for joining us during this webinar today. Please let us know what questions you have for us.
Thank you, Divya and Aaron. At this time, we will take questions. Like Divya had said, please let us know if there's anything that you would like them to answer. Just a few reminders. I put the pre-survey in the chat box as well as link to the resources. Please download our mobile app. And our next training will be on May 3rd on eating disorders. You can register via the link I put in the chat box. And the survey to receive credit and a certificate for this training will be emailed on Monday. Again, any questions? Okay, well, if any questions come up, please feel free to email them to me and I will pass them along to Divya and Aaron to answer. The slides will be available as well as the recording. Thank you again to Divya and Aaron. This is a wonderful talk, and I think this is great information that providers and home visitors, community health workers can share with the families that they work with. And we're glad that you were able to speak with us today.
Yes, thank you so much for having us. Thank you everyone for listening and for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you again to ODH, the Ohio Department of Health, for their support with the Parenting at Mealtime and Playtime program. We hope that you all will download the toolkit and the resources and join us for our next training. Thank you all so much and have a wonderful weekend. Happy Friday. Hopefully it is warm weather for everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.